Welcome, everybody, to all of you, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2024 Global Hunger Index launch. And this year, we're asking the question, how can gender justice advance climate resilience and zero hunger? If you have seen the reports already, you know that we have a lot to get into, and you might be joining from wherever you are, being intrigued by this particular topic, but I can assure you that the speakers you will be hearing from today have dedicated decades in their careers to advancing that gender justice and how that relates to climate resilience, and also helping us to reach our goal as a global community for zero hunger. I talked about us being a global community, and indeed we are. And I know that as you were joining in here, we're asking you some questions that I will give you the results to in a moment. But I just want to acknowledge everybody who's here on the platform, from the various ministries, government ministries around the world, from various embassies, international organizations. I know we have huge representation from civil society as well as academia. It's really good to be in your company. My name is Christine Mundo, and I once again have the great pleasure of steering our conversation as we unpack not just the report itself, but the actions that we can take to advance gender justice and the results that we will benefit from that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we do some housekeeping now? Because one of the things is that this event is being recorded, so please bear that in mind. You're hearing me in English now, but if you do prefer to hear me in French or in German, we have provided translation. If you go to the bottom of your screen, that global icon, you can opt for English or French translation if that will be your preference to be hearing today's events. Just a reminder, friends, let's keep our microphones muted unless we are asked to unmute. It's safe to keep those muted at all times. And of course, this is a conversation for us all to partake in. Please don't let me have all the fun here. You may use the Q&A function to relay some of your questions, to share what's on your mind, and we'll do our best to bring that into the conversation as we get along. One of the things that's important is that we take the message out there. And we have got the hashtag GHI 2024 to help us do that. So make use of that on your various platforms. Let's get the word out there that if we improve gender justice, ladies and gentlemen, we can advance climate resilience as well as zero hunger. Well, one of the things that's interesting about where we are in 2024 is that we are marking the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're also marking the 20th anniversary of the Voluntary Guidelines on the right to food. But as we know, the 2024 Global Hunger Index does paint a sobering picture. We know that a combination of increased conflict, climate change, as well as economic crises are deepening hunger and exacerbating structural inequality. So our focus here today, knowing that gender inequality heightens one's vulnerability to food insecurity, we want to reflect on the solutions that will advance gender justice and help us build that climate resilience to guarantee the right to food. Before we get into a summary of the video, I want us to maybe pull up the results of those two questions that we asked you as you were entering the program via your platform. Let's see those results now. We asked where you're joining us from, and we also asked a specific question about action that you believe would be best taken for us to help reduce those gender-based barriers to food security. So we have good representation from everywhere. In fact, we're just missing somebody from Central America and the Caribbean, but I know perhaps towards, as we get along in the conversation, more participants will be joining. But virtually all parts of the world, all corners of the globe, so to say, are represented. Okay, and then came to the next question where we're asking about the action that you felt would be most effective to help reduce gender-based barriers to food security. And let's see what that question, or what the answer to that question was. So in a moment, that will come up. You had to choose between 4 options on the action that you believe would be most effective to reduce gender-based barriers to food security. Why don't we get our conversation underway now? And why don't we start off by getting a summary of what the report is telling us this year? What does the Global Hunger Index of 2024 have to tell us? Well, we have summarized it. We've captured everything that has been put in this report. We've put that for you in a short video. So let's watch that now, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Or Global Hunger Index makes it starkly clear that the prospects for achieving zero hunger by 2030 are grim. Progress against hunger has slowed to a troubling degree. Overlapping crises have hit the world's poorest countries and people hardest, amplifying structural inequalities. Those in power blatantly disregard the human right to adequate food and international humanitarian law. And gender inequality, hunger, and climate change are converging to place households, communities, and countries under extreme stress. The Global Hunger Index is published each year by Welthungerhilfe and Concern worldwide. In 2024, the Institute for International Law of Peace and Armed Conflict, IFHV, joined as a new partner to calculate and develop the index going forward. Since 2006, the Global Hunger Index, GHI, has tracked the state of hunger worldwide by region and by country to spotlight where action to address hunger is most urgently needed. To reflect the complexity of hunger, the index combines 4 indicators that assess the availability of calories as well as quality and utilization of food. Each country's score is categorized and ranked according to the severity of the hunger situation. Little progress has been made on reducing hunger since 2016. The 2024 Global Hunger Index score for the world is 18.3, considered moderate, down only slightly from the 2016 score of 18.8. Underlying this moderate score is the reality that for billions of people, the right to adequate food is out of reach. Across the globe, 733 million people are undernourished, while 2.8 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. Conflicts have again raised the spectre of famine. The wars in Gaza and Sudan have led to exceptional food crises. In 42 countries, hunger remains serious or alarming, with most of them clustered in Africa, south of the Sahara, and South Asia. Among countries with moderate, serious, or alarming 2024 GHI scores, more than half have seen progress against hunger stall since 2016, or even be reversed. 6 countries have levels of hunger considered alarming, indicating widespread human misery, undernourishment, and malnutrition. Somalia, Yemen, Chad, and Madagascar are the countries with the highest 2024 GHI scores. Burundi and South Sudan are also provisionally designated as alarming. The 2024 GHI results reflect overlapping crises, including armed conflicts, high food prices, market disruptions, debt burdens, and climate change. All of these hit the world's poorest countries and people hardest. Countries where hunger and gender inequality are high also tend to be those where food systems are at high risk from climate change. Discriminatory norms and gender-based violence often place women and sexual and gender minorities at heightened risk of food and nutrition, insecurity, and climate change impacts while hampering their ability to cope with these challenges. Gender justice, that is, equity between people in all spheres of life, is critical to a just world and to achieving climate and food justice.
What we mean by gender justice is, first of all, recognizing that vulnerabilities and marginalities are different and work differently for women and men belonging to different groups, different regions, locations.
The second, redistributional justice, involves redirecting resources and opportunities so they're more equitable, and that requires recognizing that there are injustices to begin with.
One particular aspect is the issue of representation. While in some places, despite progress in gender equality programs and policies, women are still constrained in terms of their ability to participate in decision-making spaces and also to take leadership roles.
The principles of equity and justice must be central to climate, nutrition, and food systems policies. Governments must urgently strengthen and enforce the right to food in international law. Governments must urgently promote gender transformative approaches to food and climate policies. Governments must urgently make investments that integrate and promote gender, climate, and food justice. At the current pace, at least 64 countries will not reach low hunger, much less zero hunger, by 2030. If progress remains at the pace observed since 2016, low hunger at a global level may not be reached until 2160. Past successes show that progress is possible. From 2000 to 2016, the global GHI score dropped significantly. To protect gains and accelerate progress, decisive action is needed to address conflict, climate change, and governance issues. Promoting gender justice is a cornerstone to building equitable, nutritious, and resilient food systems, ensuring the right to food for all.
And there it was, ladies and gentlemen, a snapshot of the global situation as it pertains to hunger, where hunger is the highest and where we are as a global community in our efforts. And in the spirit of leave no one behind, we know that we would not have achieved anything unless we get everybody over that line. We need to accelerate our progress in this regard. I now want to transition us to our keynote for today, and that is going to be delivered to us by Marie Christina Kolo. I want to tell you a few things about her before she gets underway. She is a social entrepreneur, an ecofeminist activist. And for over a decade, she has been working to highlight the connections between climate disruptions and gender-based violence, as well as to amplify the voices of women and youth. She's currently the coordinator of Madagascar Gender and Climate Justice Coalition. She's also representing African islands in the Feminist African Climate Justice Movement Steering Committee. Marie, it's really great to have you. I see you, and I want to hand over the floor to you now as you deliver our keynote for this year's GHI launch.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. It is an incredible honor to stand before you today, not only as a speaker, but as an ecofeminist activist from Madagascar, which was mentioned earlier, a country often overlooked in global conversations around climate risk and disaster. Today, I'm not here to share numbers and statistics. You will find all of that in the Global Hunger Index report. And I know that we also have many experts among us. Instead, I want to speak to you about my country, a country too frequently forgotten when it comes to climate shocks and their devastating impact. So yes, Madagascar is, first of all, is not a movie. And our national anthem is not "I Like to Move It." Madagascar is the fourth largest island in the world and is unfortunately, one of the world front lines of climate change. We are living through its harshest realities every day: drought, cyclones, unpredictable rainfall patterns. These are not abstract concepts for us. They are lived experience every day that define the survival of communities, particularly women and girls. When the world talk about climate resilience, Madagascar rarely enters the conversation. Yes, most of the time, people don't even know that we are a real country. And yet we are among the countries most vulnerable to climate disasters. We are among the top 10, despite contributing almost nothing to global carbon emissions. This silence, this invisibility is deadly. It leaves us out of the critical discussions where solutions are shaped and resources are allocated. But let me be clear, Madagascar is not just a victim of climate change. We are a country filled with extraordinary resilience where people, especially women and girls, have been leading the change to adapt, to resist, to rebuild, despite all words. And I'd like to share you a story, the story of one of those women who are fighting, who are resilient. Her name is Saraz. Saraz and I, we are the same age, but our lives are just worlds apart. I had the privilege of getting an education, traveling, doing the work I love, and raising my voice on international platform like this one, or international climate negotiation. Saraz, on the other hand, oh, I didn't tell you my age, but I'm 36, and I know that I look young. So yes, Saraz, on the other hand, she was married when she was married off as a child. When she was 13, she became the second wife in a polygamous marriage. She had 11 children, two of whom died from hunger 3 years ago, and two others she married off as children as well. And yet she's one of the most extraordinary activists that I ever met. Because I met her after her husband passed away, when the men of her village fled from droughts in the deep south of Madagascar, called the Andrew region. And despite this context of drought, of famine everywhere, she was able to mobilize the women of her community, and she taught them how to fish. And this was extraordinary because it was in a region where in a region and a village of farmers and herders. They didn't know how to fish before, but where men and in this village, even men didn't know how to swim. But Sarah, she did something revolutionary. She learned how to swim. She also taught other women how to swim, even one woman with disability. She taught her how to swim, and they started together a fishing cooperative, trying to find market for their fish. So when I visited her village, she gave me a shark. I had to taste it. This is very personal, but I didn't really appreciate it, the taste when I was there. But I was so impressed by her courage, and yes, indeed, we could pity this woman, but that's not the narrative that I support. I really reject the language of misery and victimhood. We must see how these women, they resist, how they find solution, and how they uplift their efforts. That is my role as activist, because sometimes people do not understand what it is to be an activist. Someone is asking if there is a French version. Normalement, oui. I'm a French speaker. Sorry for my French accent. So sometimes I may use some French words. So yes, I was saying that, of course, we could pity this woman, but this is not the narrative that I support. And when people ask me what it is to be an activist, some activists, they protest, they advocate, they are starting, they are supporting local communities. They are artists, they are scientists. Actually, being an activist you can be an activist in different ways. And at my level, I try to amplify the voice of women like Sarah's, and also empower their organizations. So this is what I did at COP26, for example, when I introduced the COP president Alok Sharma to courageous women like Sarah's, and Sarah's was included in the group. In this small group of women, which had the chance to interact with the COP president. And while the world media was focused on my country for the first time, because they don't often do it, they focused on my country because there was this UN report stating that Madagascar had the first climate-induced famine in the history, or in the human history. And so we had so many medias which highlighted the situation in my country with very, very pitiful stories, sharing story of pity, but they overlooked the local battles and how people are surviving to these different injustice. When Alok Sharma asked Saras what she needed, what kind of solution, I really loved her answer, because she gave him two powerful requests. First, the first request was to consult women when making decision, because in a region in particular, this is a region with a lot of UN agency, a lot of international NGOs. We even call this region the cemetery of projects, because there are so many actors, but nothing changed. And why nothing is changing for Saras is because they never consult women. Women is just a quota, a number when they ask people, but they are never the one who are able to speak up. And even when they are able to share their opinion or their point of view, they are silenced by the other men, and sometimes by other women, or sometimes they are not just enough. They are not confident enough to share their opinion, to share their solution. So yes, Taz, she was, as usual, this woman she's just incredible. She was not afraid to say that first she wanted to be part of the decision making, and also she had another stronger request. And the second was to build a road so a cooperative could sell the fish, because she was just exhausted. She was just fed up with the humanitarian aid. And for us, this kind of aid doesn't bring dignity. So she said that she just wanted to do it her own way. So these women, they don't just need help. They need to be heard. They need their solution to be valued, not ignored in favor of top-down approaches. And this brings me to my second story, an example of what happened when we failed to listen. And during the same climate famine crisis, my association was raising funds to support community resilience efforts, like Sarah's, for example. We launched a crowdfunding campaign, but we were only able to raise 200 euros. Okay, this was our first crowdfunding. It wasn't very successful, but then there was this association in Germany that saw us on social media, and they wanted to support us. So only with Twitter, they were able to raise more than 10,000 euros in less than a week. And for us, it was incredible. We were like, okay, good. This organization is amplifying also what we are doing. But when it came to send the money, they refused to let the community organization decide how to use it. To them, drought meant wells and water pump only. End of the story. Never mind that this wasn't what the community were asking for. They even questioned our expertise in our own country. So, and they say that, okay, it's better to work with a German organization because they are more expert and they will do things better. So I told them that no, we want we want the community solution to be considered, and politely, because I'm a very polite person, and firmly, I said no with a fuck off. And a week later, Karma delivered. Another German organization came to us, this time fully open to listening to the community solution. And until now, they are supporting us, and we are able to support more than 40 women's organizations in their resilience solution in Madagascar. And
that's incredible, Marie. That is incredible. And, you know, I know that you have plenty more where that is coming from. But I have to interrupt you, Marie, and say maybe perhaps come to the close of your keynote, because I really want to open up our conversation there. And this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen, if you bring people like Marie on to do the keynote, be prepared for that, because the extent to which she's working, the examples that she's able to give really cross the length and breadth. But you've done an effective job, Marie, in just putting Madagascar on the map. And thank you for bringing us the story of Sarah, because it goes on to say that in as much as we're talking about people who are vulnerable and most exposed to some of the difficult conditions, we're not just talking about victims. We're talking about resilient people who are working at their solutions. Marie, thank you so much for that incredible, bringing us that story of Sarah and many other women like her who are in these regions that are most impacted. And what they need from us, ladies and gentlemen, is just that helping hand. For us to listen to them, as Marie is saying, they know the solutions to the challenges that they're experiencing. All that is needed is for us to listen to them. And thank you, Marie, for bringing us their messages over there. If you will allow me, Marie, I'm going to ask you to leave it there so that we can bring on the other speakers. But thank you so much. That is, of course, Marie coming to us there with that keynote from Madagascar. And I'm excited to tell you that as we get into our panel discussion now, we have even more strong women, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what I'm excited about today, that today is really about giving the women who are working hard at advancing gender justice and climate resilience. These are the people that we've curated to come on today and to talk to you. I want to begin with the two women who have co-authored the Global Hunger Index essay this year. They are Nietzsche Rao, as well as Sierra Vercillo. In the interest of time, I'm not going to tell you too much of their bios, but trust me, between the both of them are decades of experience in this space. Nietzsche Rao is the Professor of Gender and Development at the University of East Anglia, that's in the UK. And Sierra Vercillo is the Assistant Professor of Public Administration and Policy at Wageningen University. Thank you to the both of you, and also for the work that you've done in bringing us this year's essay. But as we were hearing it, we saw it in the video, we were hearing it from Marie, women and girls, particularly, and other sexual minorities, they suffer disproportionately when we talk about insecurity and malnutrition. As well as, of course, from the extreme weather events and the climate emergencies. But we're also hearing that the power of gender justice to address hunger and climate change adaptation, that there's power in that. So I'm curious to know, as you've been doing this work and summarizing it for us this year, what is it that is your message in this year's report, the Global Hunger Index of 2024? And Nietzsche, I will begin with you.
Thanks so much, Christine. And I think, as we've heard in the video, that it was first of all, it was a real pleasure for me to work on this report. I think it was a very sobering experience to see, as we saw in the video, that hunger persists. There hasn't been much improvement since 2016, and also that this is a result of many different overlapping challenges. It's getting worse with conflict. Every day we hear of new conflicts emerging across the world, climate change, market disruptions, and so on. And of course, that, the right to food, which is actually a fundamental human right, is largely unrealized due to differences, of course, also in terms of affordability, accessibility, availability across these different contexts. And women and children are the worst affected, but also those in particular contexts, living in low-income countries, belonging to indigenous groups, lower caste groups, as in the case of India, and so on. So the burden of hunger and of food and nutrition security and of the impacts of climate change is not equally distributed. I think this is a key message. But I think, like Marie, for me, a key takeaway is really one of hope, that there are examples of hope. And I think, as the video showed, there are countries like Nepal and Cambodia in Asia, or Togo and Cameroon in Africa, which have really demonstrated the potential for positive change. And these countries are not yet hunger free, but they have moved from an alarming rate, as defined by the GHI report, to a more moderate one. The interventions they have taken to change track do cover different dimensions of justice. And I think this is really heartening to note, even though many of them are at the level of the household or at the micro level, like recognizing women's labor, redistributing resource access, including trainings, technology provision, organizing women into groups and collectives. And for me, I think this element, which Christine also, which Marie also referred to in terms of collective action, is really very important in terms of enabling women to exercise agency, to achieve their potential, not just at the household level, but I think at more higher institutional levels, at the community, at the state, to deal with structural constraints. And I think we have examples from across the world, including from India, where in the southern Indian state of Kerala, I think women farmers collectives have really made a huge push towards claiming equal rights from the state and from the markets. So maybe I'll stop there for the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. And Sierra, to you, your key takeaways from the report this year.
Yes, thank you. I agree with everything Nitya has said. It was such a pleasure to work with her and everyone on the report. Essentially, the takeaway message is that you can't have global food security and you can't have climate resilience without gender justice and social justice more broadly. And in order to do that, we need to recognize women's agency and create an enabling environment that supports their empowerment. And that really requires structural changes. How do you do this? I would encourage you to read the report because we have a clear framework, and that is what we call the triple R's. So we need to redistribute the wealth, the technology, all of the opportunities. And in order to do that, you need to recognize that there are these particular issues to begin with, and represent women to make sure they're represented so that they can point out which issues matter in their particular context and dictate where the resources should go. So that's really what the report is about. And there are lots of examples, as Nitya was saying, about where that's happening, how that's happening, which is very encouraging. And so I think if we can make that sort of social justice, gender justice changes, it will go a long way for the future.
Yeah, and I think I just want one more question to the both of you. Perhaps if you can just present to us the single measure that you would say is required to be able to simultaneously advance gender, climate, and food justice. Again, Nitya, I will begin with you.
So I think that's an interesting question. And I think by its very nature, the complexity of it, and as Sarah said, that the multidimensional nature of justice, I think, first of all, a single measure probably won't do. I think we will need to tackle it on these multiple fronts of recognizing different kinds of vulnerabilities and differences, of seeing what's important in what context. Is it education and training somewhere? Is it land access somewhere else? Is it decent work conditions somewhere else? For very poor and marginal communities, it may be the need for social protection, for instance, and to just enable them to come up to that level. So I think that we do need to address these simultaneously. We do need to address these multiple reasons. But I think one thing which is very important is getting women into more decision-making positions, or getting their voice heard at different levels, where I think the Global Hunger Report actually illustrates this. Some countries which have done well have actually had women in leadership positions or quotas for women in political office, have really contributed to these different priorities and needs being heard. In the case of South Asia, from where I come, Bangladesh is a very good example, which till recently had a woman prime minister. It ranks, I mean, despite all the political issues which led to her leaving the country, I think she did bring up the country to ensure a degree of gender equality. Bangladesh is doing best among South Asian countries in terms of the Global Gender Gap Index, for instance. And there are other countries which have tried to say that we want legal equality for women, such as Pakistan in South Asia, but implementation on the ground has been poor. There has been a persistence of gender stereotypes and social cultural barriers. And the final point that I wanted to make in this is, which I alluded to, that I think one size will not fit all. I come from India, which is a very large country where you have undernutrition and obesity, you have overconsumption and underconsumption. And really, we need to think of very targeted, recognizing these different problems, and we need to think about targeted strategies, which could be a combination of social protection, but I think also a combination of macroeconomic policies like taxation policies, trade policies, which actually at present make some of the junk foods or convenience foods very cheap for a
Yes.
lot of people, much cheaper than healthier foods. So I think we need to simultaneously work at both ends if we want to attain the triple goals of climate, food, and gender justice.
Thank you, Nitya. And the same to you, Sierra.
Yes, so just to mention briefly, this is a very complex, multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional approach, as Nitya referred to. So one solution cannot fit all, and I think that's kind of the point. Has to be situated in place. But that being said, there are really large-scale global injustices that need to shift the balance of power. I think it is worth mentioning and reminding everyone that we don't actually need to produce more food. Justice looks like redistribution and recognizing where there are injustices and making sure those who are continuously made vulnerable and marginalized are represented, the resources are redistributed towards them. And I think it is unreasonable to continue to rely on vulnerable places and peoples on multiple fronts to solve the problem of hunger. So I would say my one biggest recommendation would be we need to, as researchers, as policymakers, as practitioners, as activists, need to continue to work at the institutional level at multiple scales, local governance, all the way up to the global governance, to shift the balances of power there and focus so that we can create this enabling environment in which vulnerable people can be heard and the resources are put towards what they value and need.
Thank you for that, ladies. And I'll be bringing you into the conversation as we get along. But I want to open it up now and invite our other panelists. I'll remind our members in the audience that the Q&A function is open for your questions. Those will be relayed to me and I can bring them into our discussion here. But Dr. Jemima Njuki is also in the conversation for us today, Chief Economic Empowerment at the UN Women, which that's her current title right now. She's serving there as Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN Women, among other things. And I know you've got a strong background, Dr. Njuki, when it pertains to really empowering women in the rural context. And then my question is to you. What would be some of the most effective strategies in ensuring that women, particularly those in rural areas, are both recognized and supported as key drivers of food security and economic development?
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for having me. It's so good to see the focus of this report. And the moment I saw the focus of the report, I knew Nitya, Sierra, you must have been part of this. So it's such a pleasure that we are talking about gender justice and food security and climate justice all together, because, and I have to repeat what both of you have said, we cannot achieve one without the other two. To get to gender justice, we need climate justice and we need food justice. I want to say one thing about hunger, one thing about women in relation to food security, and then I'll come to your question. I think every time we see these reports and we see these numbers, the one thing we really have to keep in mind is that these are not just numbers. There are real people behind these numbers. And one of the things that you learn when you either are going hungry or you're the one behind these numbers is that there is indignity in hunger. And this is not one of those topics that in 2024 we still need to be having a polite conversation about. It is unacceptable, even for one person, one woman, one child, to go hungry in a world where we are actually producing enough food to feed everybody. And I think that's why this centering this report on justice is so important. The second thing around that is around women, because everywhere you look around across the continents, whether you are talking about Africa, whether you're talking about Southeast Asia, women are the bulk of the producers of the food that the world eats. And so it is such a contradiction that we talk about women and food insecurity in the same sentence, because they shouldn't be. The people who are producing our food shouldn't also be the people that are the hungriest people. And this is where we really have to sit down and think about, how do we change this food system? And there has been a lot of conversations about changing the food system so that it is more transformative. But the bigger question is, how do we even change it to be more just? Yeah. And so I want to enter that conversation from there and then come to the direct question that you have asked me. What are the things that we need to do, and what are the things that that need to change? I just want to add a couple of R's, Nitya and Sierra, to your R's, and I want to talk about resources. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Where are we putting resources? In a world where we are projecting the climate crisis is going to push 236 million more women and girls into poverty, 258 more million women and girls into food insecurity. It's the same world where we are spending 2.2 trillion per year in wars, right? So where we put our resources matters, and we really need to put resources in the hands of women. I liked what Maria Cristina said. Grassroots organizations shouldn't be struggling to get the resources that they need, because every day they're driving action on the ground. So we really need to put resources in the hands of women, whether those are productive resources guaranteeing the rights to the land that they cultivate, whether those are financial resources, making sure financial systems are working to serve women, women producers, women traders, women's cooperatives, wherever they are, whether those are resources, digital resources that enable them to get the information that they need. The second R that I want to put is resilience. And I hear this over and over again. Women shouldn't have to struggle so that they become resilient. It's almost like resilience is supposed to come after struggle. It is really our job to make sure that the systems we build are resilient. It shouldn't be on the backs of women to struggle through food production, to struggle through hunger, to struggle through unfavorable discriminatory laws and policies and social norms for them to be resilient. It is up to us to have the right policies, to be addressing these discriminatory laws and policies, making sure we are eliminating those discriminatory laws and policies. It is not up to women to struggle through them so that they can come out of the other end as resilient. So there's an onus on policymakers, there's an onus on us to really be making sure that if you're working at the global level, as I am, that those global norms and standards are removing those discriminatory laws. If you're working at national level, making sure that we are looking at our laws and policies and removing those that, deny women the rights to own land. And then, of course, the rights is a big R across. The rights of women to adequate food, to adequate nutrition, the rights of vulnerable people to justice, etc. So I'm going to stop there, but I think at UN Women, we are pretty clear that our mandate, especially at the policy level, is to ensure that we can remove these discriminatory laws, discriminatory policies, but that we can work with women's rights organizations, feminist organizations, so that they're getting the resources they need on the ground, while influencing the systems that we can influence to make sure that they are working for women and girls.
Thanks very much for that, Jemima. Lillian Binney is a technical advisor on climate change adaptation and resilience at Concern Worldwide, specifically working for Burundi and Rwanda. And Lillian, we're talking about, if you can perhaps share with us some strategies that have, you would say, proven most effective improving natural resource management and building climate resilience in the communities that you're working with in Burundi and Rwanda, and perhaps talk to us about how you've incorporated gender considerations in these interventions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having me. So I will share with you some strategy we have here in Burundi and Rwanda. With concern. So we have various strategies. One of the most effective intervention is the promotion of climate smart agriculture technique and also agroforestry. For example, we integrate sustainable practice such as crop diversification, the use of drought resistant varieties, and organic manure to enhance food production. And in addition, we will also focus on cultivating endemic trees, which play a crucial role in soil conservation, erosion control, and other relevant benefits like medicinal benefit. And it's also important to mention that agroforestry also creates economic opportunities by the development of tree nursery activities within the community. And on top of that, as strategy, we also contribute to protecting the natural environmental here by raising environmental awareness at the community level. We have many sessions of sensitization to see the different causes of climate change, for example, and also all the alternatives that can be that can help the community at this level. And for gender consideration, we have many approaches. I will share with you one of the approach we use at every stage, which is the gender transformative approach, which include equal participation of women and men in climate smart agriculture and agroforestry training we have. We also encourage women involvement in decision making with farmer field school, which is farmer field school is just an entry point for us to promote CSA and also agroforestry technique. So for gender consideration, we also promote time efficient practice and all the environmental friendly practice that also improve soil fertility. It's worth to mention that, for example, here in Burundi and Rwanda, women represent more than 60% of smallholder. So enhancing soil fertility will also help them to reduce the workload and reduce the burden on the daily life. We also have another initiative like husband school, which is a very efficient strategy here, because this approach will engage men in discussion about nutrition and also shared household responsibilities. which at the end help to reduce the work burden on women. Yeah, so that's some of the strategy we have here. To ensure that our intervention are inclusive and gender sensitive. Thank you.
That's incredible. And as you mentioned, husband school, I saw some reactions from my fellow panelists there. That is one class I would like to be in attendance of, just to see what that curriculum looks like. But thank you so much, Lillian, for just how you're incorporating some of these gender sensitivities into the interventions that you're making. And I think that just underscores the point. We've got to bring everybody into the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're getting the sense that there isn't a one size fits all, there isn't a silver bullet, but all these different approaches and all these different interventions that we can make, all these different areas that we can target, form part of this collective effort to making sure that we achieve gender justice. And just to underscore the point, we're not going to get climate justice, we're not going to get food for all until we tackle the aspect of gender justice as well. We've been hearing about how important it is that we empower our women, that we give them the voice. We heard from UN Women that it is women who are largely growing the food that we eat in many of the regions where they are the most vulnerable. So we really have to make those fixes to ensure that we can redistribute these resources and advance our goals towards zero hunger. I want to bring in Jennifer Madueke into the conversation now. She is the coordinator of Nutrition Smart Communities with Welthungerhilfe. And you work with a number of countries, Jennifer, around the globe to sustainably enhance community nutrition. Why don't you share with us, please, Jennifer, how this really looks like, and give us an example of the role that gender plays in these efforts.
Thank you very much. So I would start by talking a little bit about Nutrition Smart Community. Nutrition Smart Community is an intervention, is a multi-sectoral intervention aimed at addressing malnutrition and improving food and nutrition security. In the communities where we work, in fact, generally, men, women, and youths play crucial roles in enhancing nutrition and food security. In communities where NSC work, women are responsible for food preparation at home. They are responsible for taking care of children. They are responsible for household chores, but they do not have decision-making powers to influence, to influence things, especially when it comes to food diversity. This is caused by some of the deep-rooted social norms and power dynamics. So through the intervention, working through the NSC intervention, we incorporate community leaders and families who do things differently as role models, to serve as role models for the community. In this way, people in the community are able to come up with their own community-led solutions and also tackle social stigma attached to men who genuinely enjoy, supporting their wives or supporting in household chores and childcare. One of the success stories we have, from Sierra Leone, it came from one of our participants, Amina, who said that at the start of the incorporation of the gender transformative approach, her husband did not actually believe in the approach, but they were keen because they saw other families who were also keen in participating and who shared their experiences on how it worked within their households. So one day, her husband decided that they were going to try out the kitchen garden, the backyard garden, which the intervention promoted. Also, he decided that he wants to give a try to including her in planning their commercial farmland, as well as their expenditures and incomes in their household. And from the husband's perspective, he couldn't believe the amount of traditional knowledge and skills that the wife could bring about. The wife actually showed him or reminded him about incorporating diverse crops in form of mixed farming, and also the use of high yield seeds or climate resilient seeds to be able to maximize their potentials for production. And she showed him the little ways they can actually do irrigation in the traditional ways. This not only yielded to more income for them, but they realized that they had adequate food supplies at their household, and it increased their well-being and their nutritional intake within their households.
Thank you so much for that example, Jennifer, for laying that out for us. In the interest of time now, and I cannot believe that we have 20 minutes remaining of our conversation, and I'm also noting that we've got some questions in there. What I might advise some of my panelists to do is perhaps have a look in there and tackle the ones that are specifically meant for you in the chat. If you're able to do that, that would assist me, because you know, it's been really great that you have come in there with telling us about the policy and the practice that is changes, of course, in policy and practice that is required for us to simultaneously achieve gender, climate, and food justice. I know that in the work that you're doing, you're encountering barriers, you're encountering challenges. But being the constructive women that you are, I also know that you have recommendations in terms of how these can be overcome. So I want to just get around from each of you. If you can perhaps target just one particular barrier in the work that you're doing at your stakeholder level, and perhaps how this could be overcome. And hopefully we can then also get a final remark from each of you. So I want to bring this back to you, Nitya. Just one of the barriers you're encountering at the efforts that you're undertaking at your level, but not just the barrier itself, but how this can be overcome. So Nitya, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. Actually, rather than a barrier, I'm going to talk. I think this point has come up about the need for interventions at all levels, from the local to the global. So I want to just say something based on some of the global fora with which I've been associated recently, like the high-level panel of experts to the Committee on World Food Security or the Eat Lancet Commission on Sustainable and Healthy Diets. And I think what I basically want to say is something positive in terms of the ways of governance and the ways of decision making, and the fact that I find increasingly that justice is being taken on board, has come into the debate or the discourse at these global levels. So the HLPE, or the high level panel of experts to the Committee on World Food Security, is of course a multi-stakeholder forum where different constituencies have voice. Now this is really important, because you have the national governments, you have the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanisms, you also have private sector, and the agenda therefore is negotiated in a sort of legitimate, public forum, rather than people talking behind each other. And I think this is really reflected when I was in the HLPE in terms of the kind of agenda that was being requested of the HLPE. And over the last few years, we have seen reports on youth and young people in food systems transformations. In 2023, the CFS adopted the Voluntary Guidelines on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in Food Systems Transformation. The report launched last year was on inequalities more broadly, social inequalities and intersecting inequalities. And I saw a comment on that. And I think that's really key in terms of looking not just as men and women as categories, but what are the intersecting vulnerabilities. They may be rural, they may be poor, they may be of particular ethnicities, minority groups, and so on. And the current call for the next year, 2025 report, has actually been on indigenous people and indigenous knowledges and practices. So I think this is really good to give the spotlight to groups which have been not recognized. So part of our 3 Rs of recognition, and hear their voice, hear what they want to say. And I think similarly, very briefly, on the Eat Lancet Commission as well, it was always on healthy and sustainable diets. It was a technical grouping of scientists. But I think this, in the next commission, which will be launched next year in 2025, actually a very novel component is to bring in justice and to bring in social and gender justice. So I think increasingly this idea that we can't achieve either healthy diets or food security or climate goals without addressing issues of justice and inequality, I think it's being recognized in the global political discourse or narrative. I mean, there's still a long way to go to make it reality, but I think this is definitely a first step. If it enters the discourse, I think we can keep pushing for it in terms of making sure it goes down. And we've already started seeing some very positive examples. Like just recently I heard that Fiji, which is again an island state, actually it has not only come up with a gender and agriculture policy, but also gender responsive budgeting. I think Jemima mentioned resources. So Fiji has actually said in its national food system transformation pathway that it's going to put resources into gender responsive strategies and action. So I think that's positive, and these we can take inspiration from some of these small steps that are being taken.
Thank you so much for that, Nisha, for using that occasion to perhaps spotlight some of the progress that is being made at that international sort of governance level. So we appreciate that. Sierra, I'll come to you now. Perhaps if you have a barrier and how it is being overcome in the space that you are working in.
So I think one of the main barriers overall is that women's knowledge and experiences, their expertise, are not recognized and not represented. And therefore, there's no finance being put towards the things that they value and need to be resilient towards the effects of climate change and the effects of injustice in the global economy. How to do that? I think there are many ways, but I want to draw attention to some of the interventions, the ways to put money. And I think one way to do that is to work towards agroecology, which is similar to what was mentioned on climate smart agriculture. So it's a model of farming which builds off of new technology, new innovation, but then also indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices. And it doesn't fit neatly within a sort of scalable prototype or set of technologies or set of practices. It really is prioritizing how people view and value their worlds. And so I think putting towards finance towards some of these things is useful. And that will also go a long way to working towards food sovereignty. So towards making countries more self-sufficient, more local. And that will help make them more resilient to global shocks, to global stressors, both in climate and the political economies. And all of this is proving to be the case in context and in studies that are showing that actually these agroecological and more localized farming practices, community-based practices are translating to justice within communities and across scales. So communities which are practicing these things, you see women negotiating with their husbands more fairly, controlling household budgets, having a voice in their cooperatives and at higher levels, and then pushing towards this requires investing in wider social movements, feminist movements, I think at higher scales to bring initiatives there. So those are some of the barriers, and I think some tangible solutions as well.
Thank you. Jemima, I'll come to you now. A barrier as you see it in redistributing resources and how that can be overcome.
I think one of the biggest barriers I've seen, and Nitya has alluded to this, is a lot of these conversations have been happening in parallel. So those that are talking about feminist movements and gender justice, and those talking about food security and food systems, all in parallel. We are starting to see these conversations come together, including at government level. And I think in terms of distribution of resources, tools like what Nitya has mentioned, the gender responsive budgeting, if we can get government to actually adopt tools like gender responsive budgeting at UN Women, we've been working on these for many years. Things like progressive taxation, taxing wealth to actually make sure that those resources can flow to the public. But one other barrier we see is how people are implementing programs on the ground. Because the women who need access to land, the women who need access to childcare, it's the same women. The women who need to make decisions at the household level that affect their lives are the same women that need climate resilient technologies, are the same women that need labor saving technologies. So having these integrated programming at community level, with the agencies in Rome, with IFAD, WFP, and FAO, we run a program called the Joint Program on Rural Women's Economic Empowerment together with government. And this is a program that brings together work at policy level, changing policies so that they are serving women. It combines work at women's leadership level, strengthening women's movement, women's cooperatives, women's producer organizations, so that those voices can be amplified, not just at local level, but they can also connect to the national level, increasing access to technologies, including climate resilient technologies, but also engaging men and boys around norms and whether those are norms that prevent women from having economic autonomy at the household level, so that it's all an integrated framework that's actually transformational and that leads to lasting change, both on the food security side, but also on the gender equality and gender justice side. So the more we start coming together as disciplines, as sectors, to really work in an integrated way with communities and with women and women's movements and engaging men and boys in that conversation for gender equality, I think the more we are going to start seeing impactful and sustainable and long-lasting change.
Thank you, Jemima. Lillian, just a challenge or a barrier that you encounter as you address gender considerations within climate resilience programming and how that could be overcome.
One of the, I will share one of the biggest challenge here in Burundi and Rwanda, which is the limited access to resources. So here, women struggle to get land, credit seed, and fertilizer, which remain crucial for farming. So how we manage this is encouraging, for example, the creation of a saving group, which help women access credit and sometimes also help them to develop other income generating activities, which in many cases are off-farm activities as a strategy to overcome the low access to land. We also provide financial literacy in the meantime in the saving group. And according to the dynamic, we also support women to access collectively to land for farming. So the key entry point is the saving group, and then we support them to access to other resources that can allow them to enhance their production, the food production. This is one of the barrier, and if there is any question, I can answer to. Sure.
Thanks so much for that, Lillian. And Jennifer, to you, because you're also now driving, justice, nutrition, and climate resilience at a local level. And one of the objectives is obviously to strengthen local institutions. What would be a single barrier that you're experiencing in that work, and how that could be overcome?
Thank you very much. I think similar to what Lillian had highlighted, access to resources, especially land ownership for women, is a key challenge in driving gender justice, food and nutrition security at community level. In Malawi, for instance, we know we have several gender-sensitive policies that are good in promoting gender equality and addressing the rights and needs of women. But when you look at the statistics, you see there is only 23% of women that has sole ownership of land. Customary lands are still regarded as, family lands, and it's a struggle to get women register a land. So one of the solutions we take is to encourage women in groups to come up to discuss their challenges, the challenges pertinent to them, understand that they have power to act and plan micro projects that they want to achieve towards climate resilience and improving food and nutrition security. A key example is one of the women groups in Malawi decided to have like joint climate smart agricultural farms. And they presented this idea to the chiefs and requested tenure-based land at least to start from somewhere. And this was approved for the women and after several deliberations. But one key thing for them is that for this strategy is that they explain that it somehow kind of reduces their work burden as they take turns and times that are convenient for them to work on the farm as a group. And also they continue to amplify their voices. It's also encouraged them to continue to amplify their voices to strengthen their agency. And the community actually appreciated these efforts and the inputs that the women made and saw that it not only, was about them and their production and their income, but also it contributed adversely to the nutritional status of their families, of their children. So this is one of the examples I can give and the barriers that we encounter. Thank you.
Thank you to my panelists. You've also, in addition to all the expertise and insight you've provided, you've also saved me some time. And I'm very happy about the fact that I can actually bring in some of the questions that have been brought in. Sierra, there are two for you, but I'll pick the one I like most. Can you just say a few words about how the unequal labor burden between men and women, particularly in rural communities, impacts food security and climate resilience efforts? If you can maybe just do that in a minute or two, Sierra.
So we understand that women have a sort of triple labor burden, and that is they're responsible for taking care of their family's needs. Often the needs also required to be productive and other needs within their community as well. And so there's this constant balancing act for most women in the world. And unless you're a very, very rich woman who can have everything paid for by the private sector, the work has to be done by you and your community. So when it comes to rural areas, this often means relying on natural resources to meet those needs that are disproportionately affected by a changing climate. And so in cases of climatic shocks, but also ongoing stressors, this means that it just makes that labor much more difficult. And in the wider economy, often employers, businesses want to use the labor of women because it's often considered cheaper, they get women at a lower price, they're less willing to argue and work longer hours. So they're most efficient. And so I think this is a huge point of exploitation across the world on multiple fronts, within communities, within households, within the market. And we have to change these structural forces so that we bring justice to being able to adapt and cope with the effects of climate change and food justice. That's what food justice looks like.
Thank you, Sierra. Jemima, I think you sparked something here when you told us you reminded us, in fact, that food producers are the hungriest. And so the question to you is, how can we explain this injustice? And what can we do to change things? I think many of us were triggered picturing farmlands in the countries where we're from. I'm from Zimbabwe, and we see women tilling the soil, but these are the very people who are going the hungriest. Jemima?
I think it is one of those injustices that are unacceptable. I am not even sure it is explainable. We would all be at a loss to explain why the people producing our food are also the hungriest, but it's that injustice where, and especially women are having to deal with those multiple roles, where they are also dealing with a lot of the unpaid care work at a household level, where they're not making decisions about their income, how much to sell, the control over that income, having a voice in the policies that are driving a lot of the things we see in the market. So I think women's representation in decision making is a key part of this. addressing that unpaid care work, a part of that integrated programming I was talking about is actually also having governments invest in the infrastructure that women need, whether that is on energy, whether that is on access to water, but also childcare services. Because if you're from Zimbabwe, I'm from Kenya, even now, if you Google African woman in a farm, you are likely to see a woman with a baby on her back, because the investments that are needed in those rural areas, including on childcare, are not there. So there's a part also of the macroeconomic policy where we really need our governments, and to keep pushing that our governments invest in the things that matter for women across board. And this is where somebody had a question on intersectionality, because that also matters. Where are the investments going? Is it in indigenous communities where we see the least investments in infrastructure? So making sure that part of this is how we change the macroeconomic policy at national level so that those investments start going to the right places. Even on things like social protection, a lot of the women in rural areas do not have access to social protection. So how do we get governments to expand those social protection floors so that they are actually covering all the women? It's all these systemic inequalities that are then leading to the outcome, to the inequalities in outcomes, because that hunger is actually just the outcome that we are seeing. Behind that hunger outcome is a lot of systemic inequalities, including around social and cultural norms, but also around how investments are being made and what they are being made on. Those priorities that have women or that affect women really need to be top of the agenda for governments. And unfortunately, when budgets are tight, it's gender equality that falls off. It's those kind of investments in social infrastructure that fall off. So it's making sure that they are remaining on the agenda.
Thank you so much for that, Jemima, for just underscoring that women have the solutions to their problems, but at some point we need to empower them. We need to make it possible that they have the agency to be able to realize those solutions. Lillian, one for you, because you talked a lot about some of the adaptation strategies that you're employing in Burundi and in Rwanda. And the question is how women are involved in deciding these adaptation strategies. So perhaps maybe just target one of those and share with us how women are particularly involved in those.
Thank you. So this we have, as I said, we have this inclusive strategy to allow women, for example, during a farming field school, there is decision how to what kind of crop to cultivate, what kind of activity to have on the farming field school. So we encourage the women in this situation, for example, to bring on the table the ideas and take part in the decision. This is one of the very basic example we have within the farmer school to enhance leadership at this level. We also have some training on other topic, household topic to allow women decide in the household. So yeah, the farmer field school is the entry point where we discuss, we encourage women to take decision, and it's I would like to say a path to build up the leadership.
Thank you, Lillian. Jennifer, for you, the report is telling us that, of course, conflict is deepening hunger and it's exacerbating structural inequalities. The question, or one of the questions to you then is, how do you ensure that nutrition-focused initiatives remain sustainable in the long term, especially in fragile and in conflict-affected areas?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I think in fragile environments, it's important for us to understand the context and ensure that we are critical while integrating and deploying a holistic approach towards addressing these food and nutrition security challenges. So from experience, I know that if we don't really integrate gender, if we don't address climate change, food systems, nutrition security, and hygiene as an integrated approach, then we may not get the desired results that is required. Therefore, it's important that as a program, not just us as the NSC, but also the government sector, the other multi-stakeholders involved, are required to put hands together in ensuring that we integrate the context-specific interventions that can cope this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our discussion is really coming to a close, and I would just want my panelists now to just think about your key takeaways, your final message as we close our conversation for today. But as you have been speaking, ladies, I heard a lot of words beginning with the letter R. I heard representation. I heard resources, redistribution, rights. I heard resilience. And perhaps maybe that could spark your closing statements. If you pick your one R word, and on the basis of that word, really give us your takeaway as we close this conversation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having weighed in. Thank you for the questions that you have put through the chats. But I'll go now and I'll begin with you guys in the order that we started. So I'll start with you, Nitya, your R word and your takeaway as we close our conversation today.
Yeah, we've had lots of R words. I think maybe I have two more to add. One is research and evidence. And I
Yes.
think this exists. So we have a lot of evidence. I think round the table, we've been listening to the evidence about gender inequality, about what women do, about how effects of climate change are unequally distributed, about rising work burdens for women in the context of interventions, especially I think in a context of climate change. I think Jamima raised a very important point, which has been emerging from my own research about childcare and time poverty, that the rising work burdens and time poverty of women across the global south actually is a big reason for child undernutrition. And many of the indicators used in this GHI actually reflect perhaps not just lack of food, because we heard that we have enough food, but actually
Yes.
lack of women's time to convert that food into and feed their children with that food. I think the other thing for me with research has also shown, I think it's a very disturbing report from the United Nations Population Fund, which recently was released, which showed that in deepening poverty and food insecurity is expected to triple the burden of intimate partner violence in sub-Saharan Africa by 2060. So I think for me, uh, the time is ripe. I think we have enough research. It is the time to act. We don't, really have time to wait. And I do believe that the three or the several R's, which
Yeah.
we have been talking about in terms of gender justice, holds the key to both transformative change and action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lillian, I'll come to you. You might be muted, Lillian. We don't hear you, Lillian, if you are speaking.
Sorry, we lost electricity here. So from my side, I would say beside all of this effort, I will add also the holistic approach. I can understand that we have many effort at different level, but it's also important to have this holistic approach to combine different scales, and also the policy have a policy framework which also supports women activities and creates a good environment to allow women to produce. I would also like to add another point. I didn't mention it, and I didn't hear it around the table, but it's also about the information for weather and climate. So climate information and climate forecast. We see here that on the ground, women are really impacted, as it's not easy to predict the weather. And so having policy which allow reinforce this part to have more information, accurate information on climate, could also help women to be more productive and play a key role as leader in climate resilience. That is my final word. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And to you as well, Jennifer.
Thank you. When you talk about one R that resonates, I would say rights. We still have a lot of work to do in advocating for, rights of women, especially when it comes to gender transformative approaches to address deep-rooted gender inequality, especially within communities. And also, as I'd mentioned earlier, it's also very important for us to, my dream is to see more and more actors incorporate integrated approach in addressing issues related to climate resilience and food and nutrition security. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'll come to you, Jemima.
Thank you. Because I believe I'm a multiplier of things, I'm going to add another R on responsibility, and mainly because I have seen a lot of comments around what about us men, engagement, and just to say that gender justice, food justice, climate justice is a responsibility for us all. It's going to be a collective process of all of us, wherever you're sitting, whether you're in policy, at community level, whether you're a man, a woman, gender diverse people. I think we have to think of this agenda as a collective responsibility, because if we don't do it, we will continue putting more on the backs of women to feed us. That's not the approach that we want to take. So let's take it all as a collective responsibility to achieve gender justice, because if we don't, the road is going to be long for all of us.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, please afford me another 2 minutes because I do want to get the perspective from Sierra and to wrap up. So a minute for you, please, Sierra, perhaps even 45 seconds if that's possible.
Sure, thank you. So just to add to the list of words, maybe respect and reverence. So to just respecting the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, local knowledge, and particularly of women. Respect here refers to actually incorporating and building around that knowledge and revering it as well, seeing it as integral for our world. I think really the future of agriculture and food systems should be built around this. So we know how to be resilient to climate. We have to look at that Indigenous knowledge and revere it. So, and also to treasure it for our future of food and our recipes and culinary traditions as well.
Incredible. Ladies, thank you very much. To Nitya Rao, to Sierra Vasilo, Jemima Njuku, Lillian Bini, Jennifer Madueke, and of course our keynote from Marie Christina Kolo. Thank you so much for just putting it to us so plainly in really how you've relayed your expertise in this conversation. The Global Hunger Index in 2024 is talking about how gender justice can advance climate resilience and zero hunger. This is what we're working towards: advancing climate resilience, reducing hunger, getting us to a world where we have zero hunger. And when we exclude women and other sexual and gender minorities, we're leaving progress on the table. We've heard in our keynotes, in the video, the report is telling us that if we empower our women and other minorities, we will advance our efforts for climate resilience as well as zero hunger. So perhaps we can put on the screen the barcode, I believe it is, where you can now access the report this year if you've not gotten a copy of it as yet. But I'm holding this, and it's going to make for some sobering reading. But I think what we've tried to do today, what we've tried to do in this event, in this conversation, is show you just how important it is that we achieve gender justice. And you heard all the different R's. Perhaps you can then weigh in on which R means the most to you in this conversation and how you can further our efforts in this regard. A huge thank you to all those who have worked in putting this event together in our different partner organizations. And I have to say to my panelists today, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think it's just important for us to get the word out there. I told you about the hashtag earlier when we started our conversation, GHI 2024. Let us get the word out there that gender justice, ladies and gentlemen, can advance climate resilience and zero hunger. There is the barcode on your screen to this year's report. Let's share that and get the word out there. Thank you so much to everybody, for our audience who've stayed the course with us. Thank you so much for taking part in our conversation. Let's meet again and perhaps share even more progress that we've made in the course of the work that we're doing. We can achieve zero hunger. Let's get everybody involved. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye wherever you are.